Hi, fifth graders. It's Mrs. DeBeer, and I'm in my camper, and I'm going to read you a story today. It's called Jane Addams. It's a biography, and it's written by Jane Buxton. I'm going to try to make sure you can read the words right along with me as I read them. Jane Addams, a woman of action. Chapter 1, Early Years. What do you want to do with your life? Jane Addams thought about this a lot when she was a child. Jane was born in 1860 and she grew up in Cedarville, Illinois. Her mother died when Jane was 2.5 years old. Jane's father took care of her and her sisters. Mr. Addams was a rich man. He was also a philanthropist, a person who helps others. As a young girl, Jane wanted to make a difference in the world. Jane loved her father and wanted to be like him. He taught her to be kind and tolerant or respectful of other people's opinions. He also taught her to love learning and reading. Jane cared about people. At a young age, she saw that some people were rich and others were poor. Some people lived in nice big homes in one neighborhood. Other people lived in small houses in another place. People had unequal lives. Jane dreamed of living in a big house with small houses nearby. Jane wanted to be a doctor so she could help the poor, but her father wanted her to have a family. Jane did not want to get married, but she did not want to defy her father. Jane's father was a landowner, miller, and banker. Addams studied at a women's college called Rockford Female Seminary. She was good at reading, writing, and public speaking. When Addams was 21 years old, her father died. Addams was devastated and shocked. She went to school to become a doctor, but she was too sad to study. She had other problems. A curve in her spine made it painful to sit for many hours. Then she became very ill. As a result, she gave up her dream of becoming a doctor. Addams, back row, made some good friends at school. Addams went overseas after she left college. In London, she saw many people living in terrible poverty. She wanted to help, but she did not know how. She returned home. A few years later, Jane went back to London. She visited a place called Toneby Hall in a poor part of London. Toneby Hall was an experiment. A group of educated young men wanted to make the lives of poor people better. Toneby Hall was known as a settlement house because the men who worked there also settled there to live. They offered classes in singing, reading, and drawing. Now Addams knew what she wanted to do. She would set up a settlement house back home. She was very excited. Stop and check. Who taught Jane Addams to help other people? Extreme poverty. Once Addams visited a London market. The market was closing. Rotten food was being sold at a cheap price. Addams saw thin people dressed in rags trying to buy it. These people were very poor and hungry. Addams never forgot them. Chapter 2. Addams takes action. Back in Illinois, Addams and her friend, Ellen Starr, looked for a house to rent. They found an enormous old house in a poor neighborhood in Chicago. The house was called Hull House, and the friends would model it after Toneby Hall. Most wealthy or rich Americans didn't know how bad things were for the poor. Addams and Starr decided that Hull House would have two purposes. One purpose was to give wealthy people the chance to learn about poor people by helping them. Stop and check. How was Hull House like Addams' dream? Hull House was first owned by a businessman named Charles Hull. The other purpose was to make the lives of working people better. They would give them opportunities that were usually reserved or saved for the rich, such as education and music lessons. Addams and Starr wanted educated women and men to live at Hull House. They wanted them to get to know their neighbors who were neither rich nor educated. They would set up clubs, classes, and events for local people. Addams used her own money to fix up Hull House. She also sought money from other wealthy citizens. This money would help keep the house running. Life in the city. When Addams and Starr set up Hull House, many people were coming to America from Europe. They were looking for a better life. Many moved to Chicago to find work. Women, men, and even children worked long days and nights. They worked in unsafe places and were not paid much. Business owners became very rich. With great anticipation, Addams and Starr opened Hull House in 1889. Many people wanted to help her. They moved into Hull House too. Hull House was a popular place for local people to meet. They could take classes there too. Soon Hull House had a kitchen, a gymnasium, and a music school for people to use. There was even a theater, a library, and an art gallery. Hull House also helped people who needed child care or help from a doctor or lawyer. Many people visited Hull House. They liked what they saw happening there. Addams started clubs for children. Valuing traditions. Addams set up a museum at Hull House to teach the visitors about the older immigrants in the neighborhood. The older immigrants were able to share their knowledge of traditional arts and crafts with visitors. Addams wanted to show that the skill of these older people were still important. Addams was a kind person. She was an outspoken advocate for the poor, and she inspired many people to help others. She became famous because of her work. Settlement houses were set up in other cities. But Hull House needed money to keep going. Addams began to write books. She was a good writer, and her autobiography, 20 Years at Hull House, became famous. She sold many books. The money she made from writing was used to support her work. Addams wrote 13 books. Stop and check. What kinds of things could people do at Hull House? Chapter 3, Changing the World. During Addams' life, many women, men, and children from poor areas of Chicago went to work. Most of them worked in factories. The conditions were terrible. They worked long hours and were not paid very much. However, if they didn't work, they would starve. Addams heard a terrible story. 3 children were hurt at a factory. One of them died. The machine they used was dangerous. Addams asked the factory owner to make the machine safe. The owner refused and wouldn't change it. Addams was shocked. Children often worked in factories like this one. Children are cheap. Most factory owners did not want children labor laws to change. They said that hard work taught children good values. They said that families needed the money the children earned. Child labor made it cheaper to run their businesses. They didn't have to pay children as much as adults. Child labor was finally banned in 1938. Addams knew that she could not help the poor by herself. She also knew that poverty would not stop unless the laws were changed. She talked to politicians about changing the laws. Addams wanted to make things better for workers. She wanted people to work in safe conditions. She wanted to limit how many hours people worked in a day, and she worked hard to make school free for all children. Things didn't change right away, but people listened to Addams. Others spoke out too, and people started to think differently. Slowly, the laws were reformed. Addams knew that changing the world was hard. She needed to change people's attitudes first. Addams is known for her work helping others, but she has also worked hard to help groups of people. Some people were treated unfairly because of their race, so Addams helped start the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Both of these organizations are still around today. Everyone is responsible. Jane Addams believed that everyone has a responsibility to help others. She worked to help women, children, and ethnic minorities. She also worked for better health care for the poor and for peace. Addams asked, what is more important than having faith in new possibilities and the courage to advocate for them? Addams also tried to change people's minds about war. She thought that war was wrong. She even tried to stop World War I. Addams talked to people about peace. She helped to start some groups for women, including the Women's Peace Party, the International Congress of Women, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Not everyone agreed with Addams. Some people wrote in her nasty letters. Newspapers that didn't agree with her work criticized and spoke against her. However, Addams knew that she was entitled to speak out. Addams kept working for change and for peace. Members of the Women's Peace Party in 1915. Jane Addams is one of America's best-loved women leaders. Addams was courageous or brave. She was often sick, but that didn't stop her. She never gave up her goal of helping others. In 1931, Addams received the Nobel Peace Prize. The award was in recognition of her work. Stop and check. Which groups of people did Addams try to help? Addams was the first American woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is the timeline of James Addams. Wow, she seemed like an amazing person, and all of you are amazing people. Sending you big hugs. Bye-bye.